the pre-colonial Philippines, the First Filipinos, and the way of life and religion. The story of the man in the Philippines goes back in the middle of the Ice Ages. The Negritos are believed to have migrated to the Philippines some 30,000 years ago from Borneo, Sumatra, and Malaya. The Malayans followed in successive waves. These people belong to a primitive epoch of Malayan culture, which has apparently survived to this day among certain groups such as the Igorots. The Malayan tribes that came later had more highly developed material cultures. It is believed that around 3000 BC, Malay tribes that dominate Malaysia and Indonesia arrived in the Philippines about 2,300 years ago. Malay people from the Asian mainland or Indonesia arrived in the Philippines and brought a more advanced culture, iron melting and production of iron tools, pottery techniques, and system of sawas, or what we call the rice fields. Many believe the first Malays were seafaring, tool-wielding Indonesians who introduced formal farming and building techniques. It was assumed that this bunch was busily carving out the spectacular rice terraces of North Luzon some 2,000 years ago. With the Iron Age came the Malays. Skillful sailors, potters, and weavers, they built the first permanent settlements and prospered in that particular period. The wave migration holds that the Malays arrived in at least three ethnically diverse waves. The first wave provided the basis for the modern-day Bontoc and other tribes of North Luzon. The second laid the foundations for the most dominant of modern-day indigenous groups, the Bicolano, Visayan, and Tagalog. The third wave is thought to have established the firstly proud Muslim Malays. The basic unit of settlement was the barangay, originally a kinship group headed by a dato, or chief. Within the barangay, the broad social divisions consisted of nobles, including the dato, freemen, and a group described before the Spanish period as dependents. Dependents include several categories with different status: landless agricultural workers, those who had lost freeman status because of indebtedness or punishment for crime, and slaves, most of whom appear to have been war captives. The people in the Philippines had been trading with the Chinese over a long period of time long before the Spanish arrived. The Chinese became our first foreigners to do business with the islands they called Mal as early as the 2nd century AD, although the first recorded Chinese expedition to the Philippines was AD 982. Within few decades, Chinese traders were regular visitors to towns along with the coasts of Luzon, Mindoro, and Sulu, and by around 1100 AD, travelers from India, Borneo, Sumatra, Java, Siam, which is now Thailand, and Japan were also including the islands on their trade runs. Gold was by then big business in Butuan on the northern coast of Mindanao. Chinese settlements had sprung up in Manila and Jolo. For several centuries, this peaceful trade arrangement thrived. Despite the island's well-known riches, the inhabitants were never directly threatened by their powerful Asian trading partners. The key, particularly in this case of China, was diplomacy. Throughout the 14th and 15th centuries, the tribal leaders of the Philippines would make regular visits to Peking, which is now called Beijing, to honor the Chinese emperor. Religions presently in the early Filipinos include animism, indigenous religious beliefs and mythology such as Anito, and influences from Hinduism and Buddhism. The earliest pieces of evidence that exist are archaeological finds including the Hindu-Buddhist gold statues. Before the Spanish first occupied the Philippines, the country was already rich with local cultural history ranging from trading interactions with Chinese, Japanese, and other neighbors, engaging with Islamic leaders from the Middle East, and eventually spreading Islam. While Filipinos nowadays are fairly knowledgeable in Spanish, American, and Japanese eras, the same cannot be said when it comes to pre-colonial Philippines. Even before the coming of the three foreign races, our ancestors were pretty much living in a veritable paradise. Let's look at some compelling reasons why we think life was really better during the pre-Spanish Philippines. Number 10. Women enjoyed equal status with men. During pre-colonial times, women shared equal footing with men in society. They were allowed to divorce, own and inherit a property, and even lead the respective barangays or territories. In matters of family, the women were all the intents and purposes, the working heads, possessing the power and the purse and the sole right to name their children. They could dictate the terms of their marriage and even retain their maiden names if they choose to do so. Number 9. Society was more tolerant in pre-colonial Philippines. Aside from allowing divorce, women back then also had said in how many children they wanted. Sexuality was not as suppressed, and no premium was given to virginity before marriage. Although polygamy was practiced, men were expected to do so only if they could support and love each of his wives equally. Homosexuals were also largely tolerated. Seeing as how some of the babaylans were actually men in drag, surprisingly with the amount of sexual freedom, no prostitution existed during the pre-colonial days. Number 8. The people enjoyed a higher form of government. The relationship of the ruler to his subjects was very simple back then. In return for his protection, the people paid tribute and served him in times of war and peace. Number 7. We were self-sufficient. In terms of food, our forefathers did not suffer from any lack thereof. Blessed with such a resource-rich country, they had enough for themselves and their families. Forests, rivers, and seas yielded plentiful supplies of meat, fish, and other foodstuffs. Later on, their diet became more varied, especially when they learned to till the land using farming techniques that were quite advanced for the first time. The Banawi rice terraces is one such proof of our ancestors' ingenuity. Number 6. We had smoother foreign relations. We've all been taught that before the Spanish galleon trade, the pre-colonial Filipinos had already established trading and diplomatic relations with countries as far as the Middle East. In lieu of cash, our ancestors exchanged precious minerals, manufactured goods, etc. with Arabs, Indians, Chinese, and several other nationalities. During this time period, many foreigners permanently settled here after marveling at the beauty of the country and its people. Out of foreigners, it was the Chinese who were amazed at the colonial Filipinos the most, especially when it came to their extraordinary honesty. Chinese traders wrote about the Filipinos' sincerity and said that they were one of their most trusted clienteles since they did not steal their goods and always pay their debts. In fact, some Chinese, out of confidence, were known to simply leave their items on the beaches to be picked up by the Filipinos and traded inland. When they returned, the Filipinos would give them back their bartered items without anything missing. Although not as advanced as our own today, the fact that our ancestors already possessed a working judicial and legislative system just goes to show that they were well versed in the concept of justice. The Dato and the elders also acted as de facto courts in case of disputes between individuals of their village. In case of inter-barangay disputes, a local board composed of elders from different barangays will usually act as an arbiter. Penalties for anyone found guilty of crime include censures, fines, imprisonments, and death. Tortures and trials by ordeal during this time were also common. Like we've said, the system was not perfect, but it worked. Number 4. They had know how to make advanced weapons. Alamtaka, which is called rentaka in Malay, a type of bronze cannon mounted on merchant vessels traveling the waterway of Malay archipelago. Its use was greatest in pre-colonial Southeast Asia, especially in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Our ancestors, far from being archetypal spear-carrying, bahag-wearing tribesmen we picture them to be, were the proficient in the art of war. Aside from wielding swords and spears, they also knew how to make and fire guns and cannons. Aside from the offensive weapons, our ancestors also knew how to construct huge fortresses and body armor. The Moros living in the south, for instance, often wore armor that covered them head to toe. And yes, they also carried guns with them. Number 3. Several professions already existed. Aside from being farmers, hunters, weapon makers, and seafarers, the pre-colonial Filipinos also dabbled and excelled in several other professions as well. To name a few, many became involved in such professions as mining, textile, and smithing. Owing to the excellent craftsmanship of the Filipino, locally produced items such as pots, jewelry, and clothing were highly sought in other countries. In fact, it is reported that products of Filipino origin might have even reached as far as ancient Egypt. Clearly, our ancestors were very skilled artisans. Number 2. The literacy rate was high. Using the ancient system of writing called the baybayin, the pre-colonial Filipinos educated themselves very well. However, the high literacy rate also proved to be a double-edged sword for the Filipino once the Spanish arrived. Eager to evangelize and subjugate our ancestors, the missionaries exploited the baybayin for their own ends, learning and using it to translate their various works. Consistently, the pre-colonial Filipinos became more easily susceptible to foreign influence. Number 1. We already had an advanced civilization. Our ancestors possessed a complex working society and a culture replete with works of arts and literature. When the colonizers came, everything contradictory to their own system had to go. Sculptures, texts, religious ceremonies, and virtually anything else deemed obscene, evil, or a threat to their rule were eliminated. Islam reached the Philippines in the 14th century with the arrival of Muslim traders from the Persian Gulf, southern India, and their followers from several sultanate governments in the Malay archipelago. The first Muslims to arrive were traders followed by missionaries in the late 14th and 15th centuries. It is said that Islam first came to our shores in Mindanao in the 13th century, making it the oldest recorded monotheistic religion in the Philippines. Islam was reportedly brought by Muslim traders from the Persian Gulf, southern India, and from several sultanate governments in the Malay archipelago. The oldest mosque in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia is the Sheikh Karimol Macdom Mosque, is located in Barangay Tubig, Indangan, Simonol, Tawi-Tawi, the Philippines. According to local folklore, it was built by an Arab trader named Sheikh Macdom Karim in 1380. The biggest mosque in the Philippines is the Marawi Grand Mosque in Marawi City, which consists of 3 floors and a basement, and a total floor area of 9,434 square meters, and has a capacity to accommodate 20,000 worshippers at any given time. The Bolkia Mosque is located in Barangay Kalanganan 2 in Cotabato City. What would have happened if our ancestors was never been colonized in the first place? Although the Spanish and other colonizers have their good points, would it have really been worth it all in the end? I will leave you all with a beautiful quote: "Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. Today is a gift. That's why they call it present. Good day, everyone. Keep safe and God bless.